Good evening and welcome to this week's edition of Africa in Focus with myself, Kwame, Ghanaian writer, broadcaster, journalist, podcaster, and entrepreneur. And in this week's edition of Africa in Focus, it's tourism time because December is a very, very peak month for tourism across the African continent. And so we'll be looking at one of Africa's megacities, Nairobi in Kenya, and we'll be telling you why you should visit Nairobi, Kenya for your holidays in December / January. So before we get into that, just to make you aware that if you like what you hear, please share it to your friends, family, social media networks. Please subscribe to Ghana Africa in Focus on YouTube. Hit the notification button, meaning that every time I upload a podcast, YouTube will notify you. Again, you can also subscribe to Ghana Africa in Focus on Spotify. Again, click on follow, meaning that Spotify will notify you every time I upload a new podcast on Spotify. All right, so let's get into this week's podcast, looking about tourism on the African continent, looking specifically at Nairobi in Kenya. Now, Nairobi is one of Africa's megacities, along with cities like Lagos, Abidjan, in La Côte d'Ivoire, Lagos in Nigeria, Johannesburg and Cape Town in South Africa, Luanda in Angola, Cairo in Egypt, Algiers in Algeria, etc., etc. So Nairobi is a very, very bustling and cosmopolitan city in Kenya, and is definitely a place you definitely need to visit when you are thinking about going to get some holiday during this time, Christmas time, so January. All right, so like I said, Nairobi is one of Africa's mega super cities, and it has a population of around about 4.4 million. So hasn't got a lot of people, but it is very, very, it's a big city. And it's actually, better, believe it or not. Many of you may not actually believe it, but it's true. Nairobi in Kenya is better than London, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Oslo, Stockholm. It can compete with those cities. It's actually better than the cities. Can compete with London, Paris, Berlin. Such as this beauty and splendor of Nairobi. So Nairobi has a lot to do and see. So if you are a single person traveling around Nairobi, lot to see and do. If you are a couple, lot to see and do. If you're a family as well, family of four, for example, there's a lot to see and do in Nairobi. And so like I say, Nairobi is the capital of Kenya, and it is also the administrative and financial heartbeat of Kenya. It is also the gateway to East Africa. Yeah, and so, East Africa is perhaps the most developed part of the continent, even more developed than North Africa. And Nairobi is at the forefront and spearhead of that, development. Nairobi is a very, very developed city, well-developed city with fantastic infrastructure. That's one thing, that you can say about Nairobi, yeah, compared to many of the other African megacities. Nairobi has got some fantastic infrastructure, which, like I said, competes anything with Europe. So, for example, there's a high-speed train that goes from Mombasa or goes from Nairobi to Mombasa. Mombasa is a port city in Kenya, on the eastern coast of Kenya. Yeah, and that fast train, express train, super train is, a microcosm of the fantastic infrastructure that is in Nairobi. So aside from that, Nairobi has, some very, very, good bus network that you can use to get around the city very, very easily. And unlike other megacities in Africa, it is pretty affordable to travel around, Nairobi. So aside from the great transport networks as well in terms of bus network, it's also got like Uber, I think they got Django and Bolt as well in Nairobi, and Nairobi has a lot of things to do. So, you know, has a very, very vibrant nightlife within in Nairobi, nightlife that can compete with Lagos, Accra, Johannesburg, Cape Town, Luanda, Abidjan, etc., etc. Again, you know, Nairobi is also has a lot of outside Nairobi. There's a lot of games. So if like your animals, wildlife, etc. Outside Nairobi, there's a game reserve there you can visit to. Again, there's a lot of history in Nairobi, which was obviously the heart of the struggle in East Africa for particularly against British colonial rule. And there's a lot of historical, you know, edifices and buildings that testament to that part of, colonial history in Kenya. And so I've got 2 videos I'm going to leave for you that will explain in a bit more detail, the splendor of Nairobi and what you can see and do in Nairobi, and also talks about the infrastructure and how to move around the city. So as well as the nightlife and the history and also the wildlife, Nairobi also has fantastic shopping malls. So for example, one of the most vibrant areas, not just in Nairobi, but the whole of Africa, is somewhere called Westlands. You could say Westlands is like Knightsbridge in London, or Manhattan in New York, or the Ladies Plain in Amsterdam, or even Stanton in Johannesburg. It's a very, very trendy, posh area, and it's popular with tourists as well, Westlands. Yeah. So again, I recommend you go to that part of Nairobi, Westlands, and see for yourself the splendor of the area. And it's like I said, Nairobi has a lot of shopping malls that can compete with anything in the UK. Yeah. So they've got fantastic shopping malls within Nairobi that sell anything that you want. If you want, burgers, you want, your Western stuff, those shopping malls in Nairobi will sell that. Again, highlighting to you, the cosmopolitan flavor of Nairobi. And on that cosmopolitan flavor, there's many, many culinary delights also in Nairobi. So there's Indian food, Chinese food, Japanese food, obviously African restaurants in there. So Nairobi is a culinary delight. So if you're a foodie like myself, then again, Nairobi is somewhere you definitely need to go. So aside from the indigenous or local, Kenyan restaurants that sell authentically local Kenyan dishes, there's obviously your international cuisine, like I mentioned, Indian, Chinese, Mexican, Peruvian, Italian, what have you. And so, in that respect, Nairobi is very, very good for that kind of international cuisine as well. So I don't want to dwell too much on Nairobi. Set for, like I said, I'll post 2 videos within the podcast, and that will show you in a bit more detail, the splendor of Nairobi in terms of its infrastructure and the city in general, and also what you can see and do within this African mega city called Nairobi. So I would definitely, implore you to visit Nairobi this December. And then most people in Europe and America will be off in that time of year. So rather than go to Europe or, Asia, Africa is a burgeoning travel tourism destination. It doesn't feature too much in your, magazines, but there's a lot to do and see on the continent of 54 countries. And this is why we are promoting African tourism on Ghana Africa in Focus. And in this edition, we've told you about the African mega super city called Nairobi. And so that's that for now. And like I said, I'll leave 2 videos that show you a bit more depth, the beauty and splendor of Nairobi. In next week's edition of Tourism in Africa, we'll be revisiting Accra because there's a lot more to see and do in Accra than what I showed you about 2 years ago. So we're going to be looking at Accra, Ghana, in the next edition of Tourism in Africa. And so, like I say, if you like what you hear, please share to your friends, family, social media networks. Please subscribe to Ghana Africa in Focus on YouTube. Subscribe also on the Spotify podcast platform and the other major platform providers. And spread the word about this great podcast called Ghana Africa in Focus. All right, so for myself, Kwame, and the rest of the crew here on Ghana Africa in Focus, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next week for some more tourism on the African continent.